Have you ever wondered about the longest, yet less talked about slave trade in history? Picture a trade that spanned over 1,000 years, its scale and duration surpassing the African slave trade, yet it remains a less discussed topic. This is the Arab slave trade, a monumental part of history that has shaped societies and cultures. With its intricate web of routes and markets, it's a tale that's both fascinating and unsettling. Let's dive into the history of the Arab slave trade, a tale spanning over millennia. The Arab slave trade, unlike many believe, did not start with the advent of Islam. It goes back much further, with its roots embedded deeply in the sands of the Arabian Peninsula. This was a time when tribal societies reigned, and the concept of freedom was as elusive as a mirage in the desert. Slavery, often a result of warfare, debt or crime, was an integral part of the socio-economic fabric of these pre-Islamic societies. Slaves were considered property, a status symbol reflecting wealth and power. The more slaves one owned, the more influential one was perceived to be. It was a harsh, unyielding system, underpinned by a ruthless hierarchy. The Arabian Peninsula, with its harsh climate and scarce resources, was a challenging place to live. This meant that tribes often fought over resources, with the vanquished becoming the slaves of the victors. As these tribal societies began to expand their influence and trade with other regions, so did the scope of their slave trade. It began to stretch its tentacles across the Arab world, reaching into Africa, Asia, and even parts of Europe. Trade in general was a major driving force behind this expansion. The Arabian Peninsula was a hub of bustling trade routes, connecting east and west. As merchants traversed these routes, they not only traded in goods, but also in human lives. Slavery became an economic commodity, a cog in the wheel of the burgeoning trade networks. The Arab slave trade was not just about numbers, but also about the human cost. People were ripped away from their homelands, from their families, forced into a life of servitude. Their stories, their struggles, their resilience are a testament to the indomitable human spirit. The advent of Islam, however, brought a new dimension to this trade. With the rise of Islam, the Arab slave trade began to change. As the religion of Islam started to spread across the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, it brought along a new set of beliefs and laws that had a significant impact on the Arab slave trade. Islam, unlike the tribal customs that dominated the Arabian Peninsula prior, placed restrictions on who could be enslaved, notably forbidding the enslavement of fellow Muslims. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, advocates for the good treatment of slaves and encourages their emancipation as an act of piety. It also outlines the rights of slaves and their owners, setting a framework for a more humane treatment compared to the previous era. This shift in societal norms, however, did not abolish slavery. Instead, it changed the dynamics of the Arab slave trade. With the restriction on enslaving Muslims, the focus shifted to non-Muslim populations, particularly those from Africa and Europe. Slaves were acquired through warfare, piracy, and even trade with non-Muslim communities. This shift led to an expansion of the Arab slave trade, reaching far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The Islamic Empire, in its zenith, stretched from Spain in the west to India in the east, and the Arab slave trade spread with it. Slaves were used in various capacities, ranging from domestic servants to soldiers and even administrators. The Arab slave trade under Islam was also marked by a unique characteristic: the prevalence of eunuchs. Eunuchs, or castrated males, were highly valued for their perceived loyalty and were often used in roles that required a high level of trust, such as guarding the women's quarters. However, it's essential to note that while Islam did bring about some changes to the Arab slave trade, it did not end the practice. Slavery continued to be a significant aspect of Arab society well into the modern era, reflecting the complex relationship between religion, culture, and societal norms. Yet the trade continued to flourish, reaching far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The vast Sahara became a route for a trade that would last over 1,000 years. This vast arid expanse, stretching over 3 million square miles, was no obstacle but a conduit for a trade that would shape the course of history, the Arab slave trade. Let's delve into the role of the trans-Saharan route in this trade. This was not a single path, but a network of trails and tracks snaking across the desert. Caravans, laden with goods and tragically human cargo, would traverse this harsh landscape, They were led by seasoned traders who knew the desert like the back of their hand, navigating by the stars and the shifting sands. The trans-Saharan route was instrumental in the Arab slave trade. It connected the sub-Saharan African kingdoms, rich in resources and manpower, with the Arab world. Slaves from these regions were highly sought after. They were used in a variety of roles, from domestic servants and soldiers to administrators and concubines. Men, women and children, each with their own stories, were swept up in this trade, their lives forever altered. But the journey across the Sahara was far from easy. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving place. Slaves endured extreme temperatures, from the scorching heat of the day to the bone-chilling cold of the night. Food and water were scarce, and many perished along the way. Those who survived were often in poor health, their bodies bearing the scars of their ordeal. Yet despite these hardships, the trade flourished. The demand for slaves was insatiable, and the profits immense. The trans-Saharan route became a lifeline for this trade, a grim testament to human greed and exploitation. The trans-Saharan route was just one part of a larger network. It was a cog in the wheel of the Arab slave trade, facilitating the movement of countless individuals whose lives were irrevocably altered by this dark chapter in human history. It is a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink, and the resilience and spirit of those who endured. The sea was no barrier for the traders, it was another route to exploit. The Arab slave trade, in its relentless pursuit of profit, utilized not only the vast desert expanses of the Sahara, but also the vast blue depths of the Indian Ocean. In the medieval era, the Indian Ocean was a bustling hub of commerce, connecting the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and the Indian subcontinent. This was not a peaceful trade of goods and ideas, but a brutal and relentless trade in human lives. The Arab slave traders exploited the sea routes of the Indian Ocean to transport slaves from East Africa to the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Just as the routes were widespread, so were the markets. Major slave markets flourished in the Arab world, with locations scattered across the Middle East and North Africa. The bustling markets of Mecca, Medina, and Baghdad became epicenters of this trade, where human lives were bartered and sold like commodities. The city of Zanzibar, an island off the coast of East Africa, became infamous as one of the largest slave markets in the Arab world. The island's strategic location made it an ideal hub for the sea-based slave trade. Slaves captured from the African mainland were brought to Zanzibar, where they were sold and shipped off to destinations across the Arab world. The slave markets were a grim testament to the scale of the trade. Men, women, and children from diverse African tribes were stripped of their identities and reduced to mere commodities. The bustling markets, filled with the chatter of traders and the clinking of coins, were underpinned by a haunting silence. The silence of countless lives lost and countless stories untold. But even in the face of such inhumanity, there were sparks of resistance. Slaves, stripped of their freedom, found ways to resist their captors and the system that enslaved them. And these acts of resistance had far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of history and the narratives of societies. The trade was not without resistance and consequences. Even in the face of subjugation, the human spirit fought back. The Arab slave trade, like many other forms of oppression, was met with resistance. The enslaved, although shackled, did not allow their spirits to be broken. They yearned for freedom, and this yearning ignited sparks of rebellion. One of the most significant instances of resistance was the Zanj rebellion, which took place near the city of Basra in present-day Iraq in the 9th century. The Zanj, who were Bantu-speaking slaves from the East African region, rose against their Arab masters in a revolt that lasted for more than a decade, from 869 to 882. This revolt was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the oppressed, a beacon of hope in the darkness of despair. However, resistance was not limited to such large-scale revolts. There were countless instances of individual acts of defiance. These acts, although small, were significant as they challenged the system and gave. The winds of change eventually reached the shores of the Arab world. As we delve into the final chapter of the Arab slave trade, we find ourselves in an era of change and transformation. The tides began to turn as various factors conspired to bring an end to this dark period in history. The European colonial powers had a significant role to play. As they expanded their territories, they also imposed their ideologies and laws. The British, for instance, who had already abolished slavery in their homeland in the year 1833, began to exert pressure on Arab nations to follow suit. Their diplomatic and economic influence was a force to reckon with, and gradually they managed to push for the abolition of the slave trade across the Arab world. Simultaneously, the abolition movement was gaining momentum. Voices from across the globe were rising against the inhumanity of slavery. Enlightened thinkers and activists campaigned tirelessly, lobbying for laws that would put a stop to the trade. Their efforts bore fruit as more and more nations began to outlaw the practice. Yet, it would be remiss not to mention the internal factors within the Arab world that contributed to the end of the trade. Changing economic conditions, shifts in societal attitudes, and the emergence of new forms of labor all played a part. As the world moved into a new age, the archaic system of slavery was increasingly seen as incompatible with the changing times. But the end of the Arab slave trade was not a clear-cut overnight event. It was a gradual process, fraught with challenges and resistance. Slavery lingered in some parts of the Arab world well into the 20th century, a stark reminder of the resilience of deeply entrenched social systems. The Arab slave trade might have ended, but its echoes can still be heard. Its legacy lingers on, a dark shadow cast long into the future. It's a poignant reminder of our collective past, a testament to human resilience and a call to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. History, as they say, is our greatest teacher. True to this proverb, the history of the Arab slave trade carries a profound lesson for us all. It was a chapter marked by the dehumanization of individuals, their forced displacement, and the relentless pursuit of economic gain at the expense of human dignity. It lasted longer than any other slave trade in history, its impact resonating through centuries. Yet, within these dark recesses of our past, we find valuable lessons that guide us towards a brighter, more equitable future. Firstly, it teaches us the value of humanity. Those enslaved were not merely commodities to be bought and sold, but individuals with dreams, aspirations, and families. Their lives mattered. Today, this lesson compels us to respect and uphold the dignity of every individual, regardless of their race, religion, or socio-economic status. We are reminded that every life carries intrinsic worth, deserving of respect and care. Secondly, we learn about the detrimental effects of inequality. The Arab slave trade thrived on a system that devalued certain lives, while privileging others. It created a deep chasm between the haves and the have-nots, a divide that fostered resentment and conflict. In our own societies, we must strive to bridge these gaps. We must work towards creating systems that promote equality and justice, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Thirdly, the history of the Arab slave trade underscores the power of resistance and the relentless human spirit. Many enslaved individuals resisted their captors, fought for their freedom, and sought to reclaim their dignity. Their courage is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and serves as a beacon of hope for those fighting against injustice today. Finally, it reminds us of the importance of collective memory. Remembering the Arab slave trade is not about dwelling in the past, but about acknowledging our history, learning from it, and using it to shape a better future. It's about fostering a society that remembers, acknowledges, and learns from its past mistakes, using them as stepping stones towards a more equitable society. As we remember the Arab slave trade, let us commit to a future free from the shackles of injustice. Let us strive to build societies that cherish human dignity, promote equality, and are shaped by the lessons of our past. Let us remember that our greatest strength lies in our shared humanity, and it is only by acknowledging and respecting this that we can truly flourish.